a few months ago that I'm going to be Yinka Oyegoke.
We're going live.
We're going live. Okay, fantastic. So yeah, that's how I'm doing.
Well, hello everyone. We're back, and because we're live, we usually show our faces. So if you could please turn on your cameras so we could be seen, and welcome everyone. Thinking Reimagined is back, and I am joined as usual by Nifemi, Peter Amanboyo, and of course our two guests today, the co-founders of Africa's Sustainable Trade. It's lovely to have everyone back. It's been a few months, but this is the start of our third season, and we're very excited. If you've missed us, know that we're back to stay. We've had to take a few months off to address some personal things, but we're excited to return. And of course, today is an exciting day because we're joined by the co-founders of Africa Sustainable Trade. Nifemi, how are you? It has been a while.
Yeah, it's been a while, Dr. Amma. Good to see you and your signature, your signature gilly. It's been a while.
It's the only way.
Oh, absolutely. It is. All right. So let me just also welcome everyone. Thinking Reimagined is back and better. And, on this episode, interestingly, we are reimagining in Africa, and it's huge yet to be tapped trade potentials. So I want to especially welcome all of our guests. Let me begin with Mr. Olumide Abdulkarim, who is an entrepreneurial director of operations and business development. He's a co-founder and chief operating officer at Africa Sustainable Trade. He's also a partner and co-founder of a couple of other high-profile organizations. I might be sharing that with you subsequently. Interestingly, Mr. Abdulkarim is a sports lawyer with years of experience providing legal services in the sports industry. Thank you for joining us on this episode.
Thank you for having me, Nifemi. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great. All right. I also have Mr. Yinka Oyegoke. He comes with more than 22 years of experience across multiple sectors, including automotive, healthcare, and government. He's an entrepreneur, sustainable trade advocate, communications expert, and coach. He's also a co-founder of the Africa Sustainable Trade. Mr. Oyegoke, you're welcome.
It's an honor. Thank you for having me.
And the usual suspects are here: Peter Amanboyo, filmmaker, writer, entrepreneur. Dr. Amma, serial entrepreneur with a broad professional portfolio. She's added more feathers to her cap now. Educationist, thought leader, behavioral and resilience coach. Dr. Amma is former chairperson of the British Business Group Nigeria, and she currently chairs Africa Sustainable Trade, which she co-founds. Dr. Amma, what part of the world are you joining us from as a global citizen that you are?
Well, you know what? Perhaps I'm not going to tell you for this moment. Is it important for you to know? The most important thing is I'm a global citizen somewhere in the global sphere doing what I enjoy most. And may I just say that Peter Amanboyo is the co-producer and of this podcast. So welcome and thank you for joining us. I think you're muted. So you might want to unmute.
Okay. Thank you all and welcome back to the new and improved Thinking Reimagined. After 6 to 7 months, we're glad to be back, and we know this is going to be the beginning of a new phase. So we welcome you all back to Thinking Reimagined.
Thinking Reimagined, changing the world. I'm so excited to be here with my co-founders. I really must be honest, I'm wearing multiple hats today, co-hosting, but at the same time sharing a very exciting venture that we've just begun. Well, it began a few months ago, but now we really just thrust it out there because it is very pertinent. Where do we start? The question I get asked very often is, why Africa's Sustainable Trade? why is it now? And the reality is that there's so much untapped potential on the African continent. And this is very critical time for us in terms of trade and investment and development. Very often people refer to Africa as a young continent. And in reality, we know that it's the oldest inhabited continent. But you look at the population of Africa, and the average age is 19. I mean, over 60%, I believe, is under age 25. So there's vast potential here in terms of the youth, the opportunities for innovation and growth of the continent. And then you think about the UN report on the least developed countries in the world, and they list 44. And out of those 44, 33 are on the African continent. And you begin to realize that on the continent where there is vast resources, from minerals to people, land, there's a sluggish reach to be part of the global economy. So we at Africa Sustainable Trade feel that it is time for us to accentuate the opportunities on the continent to improve inter and intra trade from the African continent. Let me share some figures with you. Only 14% of trade on this continent is intra. Inter-trade on the African continent is at 14%. In Europe, it's 60%. In the Americas, it's 40%. In Asia, it's 30%. And so it's time for us to address what we must do to improve investment opportunities. We're done with receiving aid on this continent. It's time to let people know that we're part of the global economic makeup, and Africa will participate, and Africa will be the continent that people come to, and they continue to come to because of the opportunities here. So I'm going to pass it on to one of my co-founders to share a little bit about what our intentions are. Yinka, do you want to join?
Okay, I think I'll go first, then Yinka will, will round it up. I'm very excited to be here. I always like to start with a story. Our journey started from just a simple conversation. We met with the big four stores in the UK here during our several meetings, and the discussion was, how can Africa help? Everybody was aware of Ukraine and Russia, how the shelves in the UK were going empty, and the question was, is Africa able to help? And we said, yes, of course not. And they said, okay, these are the requirements. Is it doable? Is it sustainable? And then we started the conversation. And while we were doing our research, we discovered that the richest people in the US are the farmers, and the poorest people in Africa are the farmers. It just doesn't make sense. And there we started the conversation and tried to implement sustainability in everything we're trying to do, from the farming to agriculture, to trade, to manufacturing, to textile, trying to get the message across that if we implement this, not only will it improve, the profit, but to improve the lot of the African businesses. And like we always say, one of the greatest issues or challenges we have in Africa is that everybody is existing on its own. We're operating as silos. We are not coming together, to work as one. Like my colleague Andy Oyinka always says, it's easier to fly from Lagos to London than to get from Lagos to Accra. It just doesn't make sense. And these are the things that are driving us. How are we going to improve the lot of because we have everything that it takes on the continent. We don't need to go anywhere. We don't need any aid. Just like Dr. Amma said, everything is available here, but we are not making use of our resources. And that is the reason why AST was established, to push the African agenda forward under sustainability. I think do you have
Beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, it's hard going last because both of you have really taken the force of what I'm going to say, right? Because I mean, let me just reiterate, right? So I love that Dr. Armour's question is what everyone asks is why? Why Africa sustainable trade, right? And if I put it in perspective, our why is very simple yet powerful, right? It's our belief that we need to unlock the immense potential of Africa, right? And unlocking means that we know that it has a huge, vast, sustainable future. We know that it is rife with natural resources, with innovative minds, as Dr. Am alluded to, the young, vibrant culture that we have. So we all know, it's common knowledge that Africa holds unparalleled opportunities for growth and development, right? Now, with my entrepreneurial hat, just taking this as a business model, yeah, any business that I looking to go to, first of all, I say, what is the market size? How big is that market? Yeah. Because before you even take into consideration what the market is, you have to know how big it is. Now, to look at some facts, Africa's middle class population, right, is projected to reach 1.1 billion by 2060. Okay, 1.1 billion, which would make it the largest continent or the most populated continent on the planet. So imagine consumers, imagine 1.1 billion consumers, right? Moreover, by 2050, Africa's population is expected to double. So we're already a populous continent, but by 2050, it's going to double. So when we put these basic demographics in context, then we start peeling down and saying, well, how do we harness these opportunities? Dr. Armour spoke about inter-Africa trade, which sits at 14% compared to the rest. I think that the least of them is Asia, which is 30%. If we increase inter-Africa trade by just 1%, we're talking about adding $70 billion, right? So imagine what it looks like that we can push that to another 10%, 700 billion. Right? So when you think about sustainability and think of trade, where else should we be trading with? Right? The distance. Am I still live?
Yes, you are.
I've got an echo. Okay. So when we think now of inter-Africa trade, as I say, charity begins at home, right? We need to be collaborating more. We need to look at how we within the continent can be doing better business with each other, right? And at the same time, we should be doing more international. So when you combine that, what we really are, our why with what, our what is, how do we create an ecosystem that takes the farmer in Kaduna, who's Kaduna, for example, or Nigeria, for example, is the largest producer of ginger globally, or sorry, second largest producer of ginger. Something like 3% gets exported. So we all know the benefits of ginger on our health, and we know that there is a shortage of food globally. So how do we get the farmer in Kaduna to the shelves in Tesco's? That's an ecosystem that is also a very easy problem statement, right? How do we get that ginger from the farm in all different forms, from the process to the organic, right, to the shelves in England, which gives us a foreign exchange, but also opens up the market. That's what we're here to do. We're here to look at that value chain, that supply chain. How can we make sure that everyone is singing from the same hymn sheet? Because ultimately, it's not actually just about Africa, it's about the world. We know that with COVID, it affected a small part in China and affected us globally. So we're truly in a global place. And I think the time is now. And what we want to be, what we are, stand for is collaboration, collaboration, collaboration. Let's get the young minds, let's get the policymakers, let's get the creatives, the Afrobeats that is also flying the African flag. Let's bring that all in to tell the narrative, to tell the story. And that's what we're here to do. So as Africa Sustainable Trade, it's both an organization, it's a membership, it is bringing the entire ecosystem. We want to break down silos. We want to bring Africa having one voice. We want to make sure we have a louder voice. We understand the different intricacies of Africa's different social economic dynamic versus the global sustainability. So we want to be that bridge that bridges that and really provide a prosperous future for everyone concerned.
All right. So
I
like that. Yeah, Dr. Haber, please go ahead.
Well, I was just going to add very quickly to what Yinka has mentioned is that it's very important for us to build capacity. I mean, in as much as we want to increase trade and all of that and investment and increase the interest in Africa, we want to change the narrative, because very often we're looked as a continent where people come to give aid to, it's like they've turned the continent into a continent of beggars. And the reality is that the capacity needs to be created, and you've got a youthful population, you've got an innovative population, and how people survive on a daily basis on this continent is mind-boggling. But if they can do that and they can show the breadth of things that they can export, it will be incredible for the growth of this continent. There's so much import onto the continent as opposed to export. And yet there is very little even going on within the continent itself. The biggest export that Africa has right now, and you can speak about Nigeria, is the people. The people are leaving. There's a brain drain. But then people don't even want to be bothered because they can't get, jobs that will pay them, or they're no jobs, and there is no financing for entrepreneurs. So it's important that people recognize that for us, it's about creating the nexuses on the continent. Yes, there are going to be policies and funds and all of those things that are available, but it needs to come down to the stakeholders, the farmers, the traders, the young people who have incredible innovative ideas, the creatives. All of that is what makes this continent so vibrant. By changing the narrative, people will stop referring to Africa as if they're referring to a country. It is a continent. There are 55 countries on this continent, not country. And when they recognize the diversity and the power that's within this continent, then we can begin to export more, not just the people who are going away because they're taking their resources, their skill sets elsewhere to heighten what's going on in the other areas of the globe, but because people want to come and connect with us and partner with us. So that is very critical for Africa's sustainable trade. Yes.
Yeah, so it would seem that you have attempted to answer the question of why. I heard you guys talk about Africa's attempt at post-pandemic economic recovery and how that has been significantly hindered by the impact of what's happening between Russia and Ukraine. If you're following the story, for instance, Moscow recently withdrew from a deal that allowed Ukraine to export grain across the Black Sea. And we know what that means for wheat price and, indeed the stability of global food prices, particularly for African countries like ours that still rely on importation. But I'm concerned about how does the Africa Sustainable Trade intends to fill this gap? What are you guys doing differently? Are you bringing money to Africa? Are you lending Africa money? Are you going to train Africans about how to take advantage of sustainable trade? I know that there's a trade week also coming up. Can someone just speak to us about how AST is filling this gap?
Yeah, I'm happy. I'm happy to take it. God, such a good question, such a loaded question. Let me give a stats that will blow you away, because I wanted to just amplify what Dr. Hammer said, right? Part of this is ultimately about changing the narrative. Africa is a continent, right? So if you're Nigerian, you know that even within Nigeria, right, they're completely different cultures, right? And our job is first to make sure that we get the narrative right. Now, the issue of aid in 2019, there was $94 billion that came back on the African continent from Africans or African lovers, whatever, friends of Africans in diaspora, right? 94 billion. That was in 2019. And bear in mind that this is what is recorded by the remittance that we have records of, right? So the Western Unions and all of those, the obvious $94 billion, put that in context. Last year, $22 billion went into Nigeria alone. So when we talk about aid, or when the world talks about aid into Africa, there's no aid that's even a third of that goes into Africa. When we talk about, in fact, even investment into Africa, there hasn't been a third of that's gone in, right? So when we say that Africa is truly blessed, it really, really is truly blessed. We need to harness, and part of our mission, really, to now answer your question, is to make sure that we get the narrative right. Because if we're going out, and also it's up to us as well, because if I'm going out to solicit, right, then I'm at the mercy of my paymaster. I'm going to have to dance to their tune, whether they have good intention or bad intentions, right? But if I'm coming with a position of strength, that I have all these natural ingredients, I have an educated young workforce, right? I'm coming to table with opportunities to trade. So how we're going to do this is, one, change narrative, two, make sure we're collaborating, three, make sure that everyone is singing from the same hymn sheet. The trade week in October, right, will be a week long of not just having the conversation, but let's bring in MSMEs, right? We know that the dynamic of Africa is a bit different. We know the dynamic of Africa is a bit different, where we don't just have small to medium-sized enterprise, we have micro, that makes 90% of the commerce. Half of the international community or aid or whatever doesn't get to those communities. So by the time we're making legislation and policies and all the wonderful things that the good intentions that people have externally and internally, it doesn't actually go through. How we're being different is making sure we bring in the SMEs, we bring in the policymakers, we bring in the young people, we make sure we're inclusive, because we understand that we have a diverse story and it's not a one size fits all. So the conference in October is a week-long conference where we're bringing in all of those and also the entire ecosystem to have the conversation, but we'll also have a trade board. We'll also look at how can we get more products internationally? How can we deal with each other? How can we trade better with each other? So we have things like, we have straightforward initiatives like the ginger I mentioned, right? It's a straightforward initiative to get it from the farms into the supermarkets, right? Which now gives us the ability to produce on three levels. The top level is export because we get dollars for it. The middle level is for the high echelons in Africa who can afford it instead of importing. And then you've got the third level, which supplies the rest of the market. So increases capacity, puts out jobs for everybody. So those are the levels. That's how ultimately we believe that we'll break down these barriers and embrace our cultural differences to take advantage of the opportunities.
May I just add very quickly that it's not just a conference that we're having in the UK, and there's a reason why we're doing it in the UK. I don't know if anyone has mentioned that, because for a moment I was off. I mean, we are a UK-based business organization. We do know that the UK is keen to invest on the African continent, particularly with the Brexit. So they're very keen to do that, and it's a high priority for them. We are going to hold quarterly conversations at Parliament, roundtables, where we're going to bring in those policymakers, those business leaders, those corporations, the financiers, name it. And the goal is that information is then brought back to the continent. We're going to create we're getting rid of the silos and creating nexuses. So they're going to be nexuses across the African continent, maybe 5, maybe 6, but they're going to be hub countries. It's almost like an airline where it has hubs, and then from the hubs, you start to break out that information. The goal is that the information that we garner, the financing, whatever is available to make doing business easier, which is a huge hurdle on this continent, that it gets down to the roots of the people so that they understand. For instance, you're producing ginger. How do you produce the best organic ginger for it to be tradable or to be exported? That is very critical. If that information is not sipping down to the farmer, who now understands the value of a product that can be exported, then there's not going to be a change in what is being created. So that's very important. So value is important for us, but at the same time, trust. We have to increase the level of trust within this continent, amongst ourselves in our local areas, but within the continent. That's very critical for improving trade or investment on the continent. And as you well know, there are policies out there, and I think it's actually come through. I'm not sure, I have to read up on this one again. Having a unifying currency that can aid trade on the continent. That's a huge part of what Afsar has been talking about. We need to do that. I mean, look at India and the UAE just signed an agreement where they're going to use rupees to trade. Djibouti and Kenya, they're talking about other ways of being able to trade. Trade is occurring, albeit it's sluggish because the infrastructure is not there. But that's another thing that we built up, is the infrastructure. We need better infrastructure. Everything is now done by land or by sea. But if we can increase and improve, aviation, which only represents what I think the African continent, even though 18% of the population can fly, only 2% of the overall global. So other areas and avenues need to be opened up to make this easier. The ease of doing business has become very critical on this continent.
So I understand that.
Sorry, if I may just add to what Dr. Amma said, to just try and shed some light so we can understand what Africa is like. You have to always remember that Africa is more MSMEs than the big industries and corporations that we have everywhere. So anything we do, we have to remember them. If it's the big institutions or corporations, they can always trade. They have the resources. But the small SMEs don't have the strength, for the inter-trade or the export. So anytime we're talking about Africa, we have to always remember them. Then you also touched about on the issue of funding, which is what we always think about first in Africa. Funding. Are you bringing money? What's it about? Is it about money? No, it's wrong, because if I teach you how to feed yourself, it's better than every day I'm feeding you, which is what we have on the table here. There are tea growers in Nairobi who don't have a market to export, not the huge companies, but the small SMEs. They can't afford it. So in the long run, they just take their goods and submit it, and they get a discount, value on their products. But guess what? In Nigeria, on the same continent, we are still importing our tea from the US or the EU, and there's a market there. And I'm telling you, come together as partners. There's you're leaving all this money on the table and you're looking outside when you have it inside. That's what AST is about.
Interesting. So I understand that there are billions of dollars in remittances that come from places like the UK. But when you say that this summit will hold in London and that you will have key decision makers and critical organizations, how do you intend to reach out to stakeholders in Africa where the help is coming to? You talked about MSMEs and all of that. And many of them cannot even afford to fly to London. How do you intend to reach them? How do you intend to also export whatever gleanings you've made in London back to Africa where it's needed?
Well, I think I answered that question. I alluded to it, I should say, is that it's very important that at the end of that conference, we're going to spend the next year creating this nexuses on the continent where we're going to have smaller conferences, smaller meetings, smaller initiatives. We also have our master classes. We're going to have workshops. We're also going to go through some workshops where we're going to help certify traders or certify people or companies so that they can then get access to funds, financial funds as well. So we've just started. Unfortunately, because of the challenge of the infrastructure and aviation, we would love to have this on the African continent, but it's much easier for people to travel from Kenya, from South Africa to London than for us to try and create this thing right here where everyone can come together on the continent. But we do believe by next year, we'll be able to have a conference here on the continent. I mean, let me tell you a story. A few years ago, we were going from Lagos to Sierra Leone. No, we were going to Liberia. And I felt that I was on a bus because we were on an airline that at every country we stopped on the path. It took us over 7 hours just to go from Lagos to Liberia. We would have spent the same time flying off to London. Why? It's because the infrastructure is not there. And those are the kinds of things that we need to address as we move forward and continue to make this a priority. It looks like there's a hand up. Peter Amanboyo, do you want to say something? You're muted.
Yes. Well, I want to talk about the youth because, you know,
You're muted. We can't hear you.
Okay, sorry about that. Yes, I said I want to talk about the youth because, as we know, a large ratio of Africa is under 25, as you mentioned. And so I shared information about the AST and this podcast with some of the youth. And they asked me a simple question. They said, we're talking about trade. And we know trade is exchange of goods and commodities. But when they think about trade and Africa and globally, they think of Bitcoins and that. So can you identify what this trading, we've talked about farming, but what other kinds of trades can they get involved in? Because they have to be inclusive in this too, because they're the next generation. So it was a simple question, but I had to think about it to answer. We're talking about trade. So what can they trade in?
If I may take that, Peter, it's a very, very good question. I love this. But also before I address that, let me just go back to Nifemi's question. Was we're doing it in London, and a lot of the MSMEs can't afford to even fly to London. And just to really amplify what Dr. Amma's already said, that we're going to have nexuses and we're going to have local and regional events, right? So that's inclusive. However, I also want to add, last year we brought, in November, when it was really the first time that the Naira went from whatever it was to 1,000, right? We brought in 100 SMEs, right? Maybe not 100, but most of the people we brought in were 100 SMEs, right? And we brought them to London and we opened up markets for them. We got them collaborating with each other. So if you make bags, for example, with Adire or Ankara or whatever it is, right, you might have good styling, but maybe your zips are not very good. So what we did is got them to collaborate with each other and say, okay, let's use one supplier to get your zips. Let's use one stylist to style. So because of necessity, right? As they say, necessity is mother of all inventions. We're able to get people collaborating. There was over $200 million worth of trade that happened because we're able to go to the supermarkets. We're now able to go to the fashion houses and saying we've got a consortium of people working together, right? So it's very important that we understand that we also have to change our narrative in terms of what the obvious is. Now, to answer your question directly, it is Africa's sustainable trade, and most people think of trade as the ginger or the cryptocurrencies, but the root of every travel is trade. The root of every every interaction is commerce, ultimately, right? Africa, when we talk about changing the narrative, the biggest trade that's coming out of Africa right now is Afrobeats. It's not seen as trade, but it is trade. The biggest trade is that there's a non-tangible where an artist like a Davido or Wizkid are not just trading, they're also ambassadors. Because that, and I say this a lot, there's that 5-year-old kid in Siberia somewhere, and I use Siberia because it's a long lost whatever, right? It's far out there. There's a 5-year-old kid in Siberia who would never think of Africa, typically, right? They'll get on their life and live till 90 years old and be happy, right? However, that 5-year-old kid says, I like this Afrobeats. Where's that from? Oh, that's Nigeria. Oh, right. There's an Afrobeat concert. I'm now 17 and I want to go to see these artists, these Burna Boys and these. I want to go and see them. These are like, he's now educated, or she is now educated about Afrobeats, is now thinking, I want to go to Ghana. I want to go to Nigeria to a concert to hear, right? That's trade. That's bringing in, right? So the young people are misunderstanding when you look at trade and thinking it's just about trading commodities. We talk about technology today. We talk about AI. What is AI? AI basically is a supercomputer that can chunk a lot of data, right? All of those young ideas, right? Why was Bill Gates in Nigeria? Why was the CEO of ChatGPT, the ChatGPT that has put AI to the forefront? Why are these people in Nigeria? Because they understand the power of the numbers. So going back to the numbers, by 2050, Africa is going to be doubled, right? They also understand the power of the youth. So the youth have so many opportunities because they can trade whatever they want to trade. Their ideas are going to make it because simply by sheer numbers, right? We live in a world of social media. In my day, when I was in media, it was one to many. We were the magazine or we were the media. We put out information as one and everyone read it and said, right, that's what it is. We're in many to many now. Anyone on their social media platform can put out information. We can't even decipher opinions from facts, right? So if you have volume and you have numbers, you're already winning. Because if we are sharing ideas and we're on the continent and we all sing from the same hymn sheet, that means that 1.1 billion voices are voting for something to happen. We will soon get rid of the infrastructural problems because we have the numbers. Bill Gates and the ChatGPT CEO and all of the innovators and technology are going to say, we have to. It was a few years ago, I think it was before COVID, that Zuckerberg from Facebook was also in Nigeria. They understand the numbers. They will build the infrastructure because they need those numbers, right? 1.1 billion people. So the young people, while it's tough for them right now, they're actually on the precipice of greatness because just by sheer numbers, they're going to be moving and trading all their ideas, all their beauty, and they're born into the technology. So we imagine that again, in my time, we weren't born into a mobile phone or the internet where we have all of this information at hand. Back in the day, if you were an actor, you had to come from a certain family, a certain school, and all the rest of it. Today, whether you're a musician, you're an actor, you can get on your YouTube and put yourself out there, and you have 1.1 billion people voting for you. You now take over. So that's probably long, but probably long answer. But I like to give full context to understand that because the young people are very important for us. They really are our future. And actually, to also add to Nifemi's question. A lot of times I see people say, I've done enough conferences and been to enough conferences and events and people talk about young people, but they never bring them to the conferences. We're bringing them to the conferences. We have a whole day where we're going to the Oxford universities, we're going to the universities here and doing collaborations with African universities because we want to hear what they have to say. right? And then we called outsourcing. So in terms of trade, Peter, I think we'll have to take some of this offline because I'll be going forever, but there's an outsourcing opportunity as well, which makes perfect sense. Asia does a lot of outsourcing. Nigeria, I talk about it, Kenya, these are countries that are 6-7 hours away with English actually as their first language, right? So all that outsourcing is a huge untapped market that again we want to look into. So
You're right, Mr. Oig. If we don't stop you, keep going. We have just about 15 more minutes to go, and I'd like us to squeeze in a lot more. That figure you mentioned that have gone up as high as 1.3 billion people, and the continent has a potential of a combined GDP of around $3.4 trillion. So it's a huge potential that we're talking about here. But I want us to explore this interesting angle very quickly, and then we'll take questions and also give more details about the trade week before we go. African leaders lately have been advocating for what they call a new global financial model, where power isn't in the hands of a few. If you follow the Paris summit, the Kenya president, William Ruto, had talked about restructuring financial systems and why the resources shouldn't be controlled by World Bank or the IMF. I'm just curious about what the ASD model is to ensure that it doesn't foster this culture of exploitation, of Africa by the West.
If I may take that, first of all, you have to remember that we're Pan-African. Let's remove the hat that the first event is occurring in the UK. And it's occurring in the UK because we're a British-based UK company. So that's why it's occurring. Just for more information, we have already about two or three presidents on the continent who have also informed us that they want to be at the conference, they want to be at the event, not just because they want to travel, but they feel and understand the meaning of Africans need to speak and trade with each other as well as trade with the West. We can't abandon the West, but we can still increase the trade we are doing intra-Africa. So we don't have any political agenda as in trying to control the whatever, but our foremost interest is Africa and how we can grow the wealth of the continent.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Interesting. I like the way you put it. So someone is listening to the podcast right now or watching the stream and wants to know, how do I, be a part of this? How do I, for instance, register with the Africa Sustainable Trade? How do I participate in the forthcoming trade week in October? Is this an annual event? How long is it going to take? Who's going to help us with all of those information?
Okay.
I think the easiest is to go on our website and register, right? Follow our socials because we're doing so many things. We have a masterclass coming up on renewable energy. I'll also say go to our website and download our verticals, which we've used the creative acronym. And it gives you all the verticals that we're looking at because we're looking at everything from renewable energy to sustainable fashion, right, to circular economy. So I think the first thing is to join us on the website and also join our socials as we have new events coming up that will be posted. We have a beautiful masterclass coming up on Monday on renewable energy. We've got some incredible experts who'll be coming on to talk about renewable energy and actually the just transition, because renewable energy is again a buzzword, but how does Africa join that race? It has to do it in its own way that works for Africa and not the way that it's been pushed down our throats at the moment.
All right, indeed, push down our throats. Dr. Ama, are you still there?
Yes, I am here. Sorry, I was muted. Yes.
I just want us to drive home the ideology behind sustainable trade, because there's a lot of trade taking place within the continent, and I know that you've been an advocate of the need to align our practice with the SDGs in the area of creating economic value, not only reducing poverty and inequality, but also preservation and reuse of environmental resources and things like that. We seem to be miles away from achieving this standard in this part of the world. Talk to us about how AST is coming into play in this game.
Nifemi, you're absolutely correct, because those standards and that whole entity of the SDGs was created outside of this continent. I don't know how many people from this continent were actually involved in it. The reality is that it's a monumental task, and you have to break down the ASGs into benchmarks. This is my theory. You can't achieve the SDGs, I'm mixing all my acronyms on. But you can't achieve the Sustainable Development Goals in the time frame that's been given, which is 2030. It's impossible. You have to break them down into benchmarks and then take on the benchmarks that are doable within your area. So for us, economic growth is important. Decent work is important. We've talked about it in investment. Empowerment of women and youth is important. Education is important. Upskilling people so that they're able to participate is very important. Understanding the social cohesions that are necessary for people to work and collaborate and engage is important. Partnerships. We can actually grow this continent exponentially if we learn to engage and collaborate. But it starts with trust and communication. We have the ease of the English language, the French language, because there's so many languages on this continent. I think there are over 500 and something. I don't even know how many they are right now. I'm going to actually make that a task for me to understand how many languages. But these unifying languages make it easier for us to communicate and move forward. So it is important for us to be honest about the constraints that we have in place, and then to address these constraints one at a time to make it easier for people to achieve what is possible on the continent as individuals, as MSMEs, as corporations, as governments. We're all stakeholders in the progress of this continent. It cannot come together. It cannot materialize if each person does not recognize their role and their part to improving the African sustainable.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, we're bringing Wakanda to the UK in October. It's AST flagship event, the African Sustainable Trade Week. And from what I've heard, it's about reshaping the narrative of trade in Africa and beyond. So I'm just going to take some final submission from our guests on this podcast, particularly what viewers and listeners should be cognizant of. We have explored all of the potentials that are resident in Africa. How can we now begin to be a major, big player in the midst of it?
Can I ask very quickly, because we have Antonella here, she joined us, if she would like to say a word before we go to closing statements. Is that okay? Thank you.
Sorry, I've got my background on. Actually, I love what you were saying just now, Dr. Ram. I've just put a comment as you were saying my name, and it is about collaborating, it is about working together and trying to see how we can all support each other and make sure that, we all grow sustainably all over the world. So, and I'm more than interested to kind of learn more and find out how I can support. Can you hear me?
Absolutely, Antonella. Thank you so much for your contribution. Good to see you again. All right, so Mr. Abdikarim and Mr. Oyegoke, let's have your final comments on this discuss.
Well, our concern, like we've said for the past 1 hour, is how we're going to increase trade in Africa. We're living so much on the table, and we need to break down all the silos we have and connect with each other. It's all about partnership. We can't do it alone. We can only push as much as we can, the narrative to explore trade. And like we said, when we say trade, it doesn't mean only tangible goods. The music, like Inka said, is also part of the equation. So it's to increase wealth and increase, the sustainability aspect of each of our creatives on the continent. Andy, you want to round up? Or Dr.
Yes,
Howard?
absolutely.
Okay.
I think that, I think the easiest way to round up is really enforcing that our commitment is fueled by a vision, a desire to shape a brighter and greener future for Africa, right? And the world, right? Because it really is inclusive through our initiatives, master classes, UK Parliament roundtables, conferences like the AST, which is split between exhibition, that's going to hold, as many people to showcase, the conferences, the discussions. We really want to empower individuals and organizations that have a global interest to lead the change. We can be. There is a vision, and we can lead the change in renewable energy as it's responsible. It's no longer just a buzzword. It's good business. It's good for people. It's good for the environment. It's good for all of us. So join us in any way, shape, or form. I want everyone to join us, because everyone's voice is going to make the tapestry that Africa is to become Africa sustainable.
Absolutely.
And I'll just add to that, if I may, that inclusive and sustainable trade not just empowers Africa, but allows Africa to be on a global exchange with everyone else. And that is very critical for us as Africa's sustainable trade. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Peter Boyo. I would just love you to talk to us about, we're back now, bigger and better. Talk to us about what we should expect from Thinking Reimagined in the coming days.
Okay, well, first of all, I'd like to thank all our guests and inviting them back, because there's really more to talk about. And I hope you guys will come back, ladies and gentlemen, will come back and join us, because sitting here, I've just learned that the kid in Siberia will take a flight to come to Nigeria to see a concert. And when he comes to Nigeria, he's going to book a hotel, he's going to go to restaurants, he's going to go shopping. So all that is trading. I didn't see it as that before. And then he goes back and he tells his friends, oh, Nigeria is a great place. So more revenue is coming in. And so I think you should come back and talk more and teach us more, because I myself, I thought I knew everything, but I'm learning. So thank you very much. And also watch Thinking Reimagined, because like we said, it's bigger and better. And look at this episode today. This is innovative. This is different from what we've been doing. So watch Thinking Reimagined, and all those watching on Facebook and YouTube, please follow us, share, comment, follow AST, Africa Sustainable, their social medias and their website. So thank you guys. And ladies and gentlemen, I keep saying guys, hope to see you back here again.
Indeed. Thank you, Peter Boyo. Thank you to Antonella Ragona for joining this conversation as well. Dr. Ama, Andy Oyegoke, Olumide Abdukarim. Thank you so much for your thoughts. That's our show. That's this episode on Thinking Reimagined. We're back again, same time, I believe, next week for yet another exciting edition. I'm Nifemi Oguntoye. See you guys again.
Thank you, everyone.
Nice seeing you all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having us. Beautiful day.
Great show. It's really been a great show.
Thank you for having me. Nice seeing you again, Dr. Rama and Andy and everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Everyone.